Here is a blunt, thorough, and condemning assessment of the Julie Royce episode and the underlying record she published. An assessment that sides clearly and unapologetically with Jonathan Lamb and Suzy Lamb, and with the rights of their child, baby Lamb, to truth, protection, and justice, and that names, condemns, and refuses to mince words about the conduct, decisions, and structural protections that appear to have been deployed by Joni Lamb, Daystar leadership, and their close associates in this case. I base every major factual point on the police interview recordings, documentary materials, and lecture materials you provided. I cite those files where they support the claim. Read it as a moral, spiritual, and practical indictment, not as the final legal verdict, only a court can hand that down, but as a damning appraisal of the way power, family loyalty, and institutional reputation were wielded against a child and those who tried to protect her. The executive judgment up front one, verdict, moral, not legal. The record, including 2 recorded police interviews with Rebecca Lamb Weiss and J.W. Weiss, the supporting witness statements, including Silvia the housekeeper, and contemporaneous notes, outlines behavior and institutional choices that are morally reprehensible and deeply harmful. The dominant pattern is one of minimization, secrecy, protectionism, and preference for institutional reputation over child safety. Those patterns, as documented in the interview materials and lecture notes, demand moral condemnation. 2. Who to defend? Jonathan Lamb and Suzy Lamb, the parents, deserve the presumption of moral support from anyone who prioritizes child safety and truth-telling. They reported frightening disclosures, attempted to pursue official channels, and ultimately chose public exposure because other routes failed or were blocked. Their public statement, that they chose to shine light into the darkness, is not theatrical hypocrisy, but a predictable response when insiders protect insiders and legal procedural channels stall. 3. Who to condemn? The conduct attributed to Joni Lamb, the family matriarch and Daystar president, and certain institutional actors, shielding, insistence on innocence without transparent investigation, and pressure to keep things private, is morally indefensible. The material shows that Joni and others prioritized family or brand protection and attempted to control information flow in ways that left baby Lamb vulnerable and a family fractured. The record implicates not just a single failure, but a systemic reflex to protect power. The facts that make this case morally explosive and why they matter. Below, I lay out, point by point, the facts and the moral problems they create. Each fact is linked to the police interview recordings / lecture file you provided, so the line between evidence and judgment is clear. 1. A child reported graphic abuse, then stopped speaking after an adult conversation with Joni Lamb. Baby Lamb disclosed graphic details of abuse in November 2020, but according to the record, did not identify the abuser at that moment. The very next day, she spoke privately with her grandmother, Joni Lamb, and afterwards stopped talking. That sequence is explosive. A child discloses, then is silenced after a single private conversation with an adult who had institutional interest in the outcome. That's exactly the kind of dynamic that produces institutional cover-ups and re-traumatizes victims. Why it matters morally. When a child withdraws after a conversation with an authority figure who has a stake in the institution, alarm bells should sound. Protectors should protect the child, not orchestrate private damage control. The interview materials show no recorded, good faith, transparent, protective response by leadership at that point. Instead, the record hints at a prioritization of family reputation. That is blameworthy. 2. A beach house incident where a child was found naked, followed by an immediate family declaration of innocent. During a family vacation in August 2021, Miramar Beach, Jonathan Lamb found a family member, Josh Brown, Director of Business Development at Daystar, husband of Rachel Lamb Brown, in his daughter's bedroom while baby Lamb was naked. This is not a minor or innocuous occurrence. It is an emergency. According to multiple accounts in the materials, the immediate institutional reaction, coming from Joni Lamb and others, was to declare Josh innocent and prioritize the family brand and reputation over a transparent and independent inquiry. Why it matters morally. When a protective adult discovers a non-parent adult in a child's bedroom under those circumstances, the moral and responsible path is to secure the child, separate the adult from access, and trigger an independent investigation. The record instead shows denial and protection. That choice is a moral failure on the part of leadership charged with stewarding children and moral authority. 3. Independent, corroborating witness as who see troubling behavior but feel terrified to speak. The materials describe a housekeeper, Silvia, reported elsewhere as Silvia Gonzalez, who corroborated the version that baby Lamb went upstairs to change and Josh Brown followed, and who also reported seeing Josh kissing her on her neck and her face and her head incessantly while the child was very young. Silvia was reportedly absolutely terrified to talk because of fear of losing her job. Her contemporaneous corroboration shifts the dynamic from he said/she said to a pattern of observed behavior by a third party. Why it matters morally. When workers witnessing inappropriate behavior are terrified to speak, that is not just an employment problem, it is a moral crisis. Fear of reprisal is the oxygen of cover-ups. Institutions that create environments where witnesses fear economic retaliation are morally complicit in silence. Silvia's account makes the parents' stance look more credible, yet leadership still acted to suppress or dismiss the concerns. That is unconscionable. 4. Family members, Rebecca and J.W. Weiss, who initially hesitated but then confirmed a pattern after rereading a private 2021 document. J.W. Weiss had composed a Google Doc in 2021 cataloging his worries and observations. In January 2025, Rebecca Lamb Weiss and J.W. Weiss gave 2 police interviews to Detective Nick Garcia. In the first, they sounded tentative. In the second, after rereading the doc and speaking with Silvia, their testimony hardened and corroborated the more disturbing accounts. That evolution matters because it demonstrates both the presence of earlier written concerns and how pressure, fear, and family dynamics can delay truth-telling. Why it matters morally. Delayed testimony, particularly where there is fear of retaliation or family pressure, is sadly common in abuse cases. The critical moral point is that the hesitancy belonged to those within the protective circle, not to the parents, Jonathan and Suzy Lamb, who raised the alarm. The interview materials show the Weiss couple ultimately chose truth to protect baby Lamb, even though it put them at odds with family leadership. That courage deserves affirmation, not condemnation. 5. Attempts to keep written concerns out of hands of law enforcement through claims of privilege and secrecy. Police sought an unredacted copy of JW's letter document. The record indicates legal pushback citing attorney-client privilege. Daystar's lawyer Michael Heiskell was involved, and an attempt to refuse search warrants for unredacted materials. That procedural dancing is morally poisonous. The use of legal technicalities to shut down evidence access, real or asserted, is the institutional instinct of a powerful organization that would rather shield insiders than enable transparency. Why it matters morally. Legal privilege is a legitimate tool for protecting attorney-client communications, but weaponizing privilege to bottle up evidence or to create opacity around allegations involving child safety is unethical, especially when it is used by the same institution with deep influence over careers and livelihoods, Daystar/Daystar TV. The interview recordings show this dynamic operated to frustrate investigators and inhibit public accountability. That is a structural moral failure. 6. Investigators closed the case for lack of outcry and insufficient evidence, but left the door open to reopening. Colleyville police ultimately closed the case. May 2022, closure. The Roy's article also references closure, citing insufficient evidence and noting baby Lamb had not made an outcry to investigators. The interview materials emphasize the case could be reopened if baby Lamb later makes a formal disclosure. This procedural closure is technically lawful, but morally unsatisfying when set against the pattern of secrecy and witness fear documented in the files. Why it matters morally. Law enforcement follows rules of evidence. If they lack a prosecutable case, they close it. But if an institution has been obstructive, whether by threatening employees, keeping witnesses silent, or redacting documents, the moral culpability for the failure to secure evidence lies with those who made it hard to find the truth. Closing a case for insufficient evidence when there were contemporaneous behaviors and frightened witnesses is unacceptable if those conditions were created or tolerated by institutional leaders. That is precisely the dysfunction the materials expose. How Daystar/Joni Lamb's choices functionally protected access and minimized consequences. This is the core of the condemnatory case. Even if every contested factual issue is taken as ambiguous, the pattern of institutional behavior moves from acceptable to morally grotesque. A. Prioritizing reputation and family cohesion over child safety repeatedly. The record shows a reflex to preserve family brand and reputation rather than prioritize a full and independent fact-finding. The interview materials indicate family leadership declared Josh innocent immediately after the beach incident. That declaration, before a transparent, independent inquiry, is evidence of an institutional reflex to protect insiders. Moral verdict. Any organization that treats reputation as a higher priority than the safety of children is rotten at its core. Leaders in such a system are failing morally and spiritually. B. Creating fear among staff and witnesses. Economic and reputational intimidation. Silvia's fear to speak is not incidental. The interview materials report she was terrified she would lose her job if she talked. When employees feel they must choose between telling the truth and earning a paycheck, the environment is coercive. Leadership bears responsibility when employees fear speaking. Moral verdict. A system that institutionalizes fear is complicit in enabling abuse. That is not just negligent, it is active moral harm. C. Using legal tools, privilege, ND, aposture, to bottle up information. The record includes an insistence on ND, AS, and legal assertions via Michael Heaskell, Daystar's lawyer, that shut down disclosure. While contracts and privilege have legitimate uses, they are immoral when deployed to silence allegations of child abuse or to shield insiders from scrutiny. The interview materials show concern about NDAAs and whether redactions would be used to avoid transparency. Moral verdict. Weaponized legal secrecy is a cowardly apparatus used to hide uncomfortable truths. Using attorneys and privilege to shield potential wrongdoing adds moral culpability to the leaders who authorize such strategies. D. Family loyalty elevated to a code that silences protective relatives. The Weiss couple's accounts show they were ostracized and cut off. They were treated as the problem rather than the people trying to protect children. The materials recount that Rebecca and J.W. Weiss were cut off and treated harshly for raising concerns. That punishment of truth-tellers is a hallmark of abusive institutions. Moral verdict. Punishing or ostracizing relatives who raise concerns is an act of institutional cruelty. It silences whistleblowers and rewards cover-up. Direct, blunt moral condemnation. I will now state plainly what the record obliges us to say. 1. Joni Lamb and those who rallied to protect insiders instead of baby Lamb acted immorally. The materials showed that the leadership prioritized family and brand integrity over an independent, transparent, and fearless investigation. That is wrong on its face. When you lead a ministry or a religious institution, your first duty is to the vulnerable, not to celebrity, influence, or ratings. 2. Protecting insiders at the cost of a child's safety is a grievous betrayal of Christian leadership. If Joni Lamb and Daystar leadership are stewards of a Christian ministry, the scriptures and basic moral responsibility instruct leaders to guard the flock, especially the weakest. The record suggests the opposite. The flock was sacrificed to preserve family power. That is scandalous and demands public repudiation and ecclesial accountability. 3. Using legal privilege and NDAs to obstruct access to relevant documents, while convenient legally, is morally suspect when the documents concern child safety. If an institution would prefer privilege over protection, its moral compass is broken. The record's discussion around redactions and the Google Doc shows how legal maneuvers were used to shield rather than reveal. That is a shameful misuse of legal tools. 4. Silencing and intimidating witnesses. Silvia is reprehensible and morally criminal in spirit, even if not technically a crime, in every jurisdiction. To create an environment where a cleaning lady is terrified to testify because she fears losing her livelihood is to build a machine for enabling abuse. That is unconscionable. 5. The Weiss couple's testimony deserves support and vindication. They did the hard thing. They documented their observations. They took their concerns seriously. They submitted to investigators, Colleyville Police, Detective Nick Garcia, and when some of those channels failed or stalled, they chose public testimony in the Roy's report. That courage should be welcomed and amplified, not minimized. Concrete, ethical, and practical prescriptions. What should happen next? A condemning assessment is only meaningful if it points toward corrective action. Based on the record, here is what must happen. Immediately, transparently, and publicly. 1. Independent, outside investigation with subpoena power. If local police close the case for lack of prosecutable evidence, the family's claim of institutional obstruction means independent investigators, state attorney general, federal child protection authorities, independent child forensic specialists must be allowed to review unredacted materials and interview witnesses without fear of retaliation. The interview materials show police requested documents and encountered privilege barriers. An appointed independent investigator with proper authority could move past those barriers. 2. Protections and support for witnesses. Employment protections, relocation assistance, and legal counsel should be offered to any witness who fears speaking. Silvia's fear and the Weiss couple's ostracism reveal a culture of intimidation. Reversing that requires protective steps and whistleblower safeguards. 3rd, full transparency about NDAs and redactions. If NDAs exist in contracts used by Daystar leadership, list them publicly and explain their scope. NDAs that attempt to prevent reporting of child abuse should be voided publicly. The interview materials show confusion about the NDA that must end in public clarity. 4th, independent ecclesial review and accountability. A credible external ecclesiastical body should audit Daystar's child safety policies, past complaints, and institutional responses. Religious institutions that care about holiness must be seen to act with holiness. This is not optional. The interview materials demonstrate a systemic problem requiring institutional repentance and reform. 5. Pastoral care and reparative measures for the family and for survivors. Regardless of legal outcomes, survivors and their families need pastoral and therapeutic support paid for by the institution if the contested behavior occurred in institutional context. Leadership that harmed people must make amends and fund healing resources. Final moral wrap: why silence isn't neutral. It's active harm. The Roy's report materials and the police interview recordings reveal a painful truth that should be obvious to any moral agent. Silence, protectionism, and secrecy in the face of child safety concerns are not neutral acts. They are active harms. Every time a leader chooses reputation over an impartial inquiry, every time an employee is terrified to speak, every time a document is redacted or withheld under the banner of privilege, the moral balance tips toward enabling abuse and toward betraying the weak. Jonathan Lamb and Suzy Lamb sought protection and truth for baby Lamb. They were met with institutional reflexes that favored insiders. That is morally untenable. They deserve moral support, public sympathy, and the presumption that the choice to go public was an act of last resort courage, not cynicism. Rebecca Lamb Weiss and J.W. Weiss deserve affirmation for stepping forward even when family pressure and personal cost were real. Conversely, Joni Lamb and those who use the mechanisms of legal power, reputation management, and employment control to shield family members, including Daystar lawyer Michael Heiskell, and the institutional posture of Daystar/Daystar TV, must be publicly rebuked and institutionally required to answer. Religious leadership that treats brand before a child's welfare has abdicated its most basic calling. Closing. A moral challenge to the church and to Daystar. If Daystar, or any religious institution, is to survive the moral test implicit in these files, it must choose transparency over secrecy, protection for the vulnerable over protection for the powerful, and truth over PR. The documents and interview materials, as reported by Julie Roys on the Roys Report, are not just an ugly family drama. They are a test case for how religious institutions face wrongdoing among their own. To leaders everywhere, I say this plainly. If your first instinct is to protect a brand rather than a child, you have already failed in ministry. If you want to prove otherwise, begin with the 5 concrete steps above: independent investigation, witness protections, transparency about NDAs, external ecclesial accountability, and funded pastoral therapeutic care. To those who've read, watched, followed this story, and care about justice, stand with Jonathan Lamb and Suzy Lamb. Support survivors. Demand transparency. Refuse cheap pieties about family that endanger children.